Mega Maniacs. This is Mr. MegaManFan, and you are looking at Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle for the Sega Genesis. And Genesis does what Nintendon't, because you won't find this game on any of those platforms, but you will find it on Sega Master System multiple times. They had so many different Alex Kidd games on that system, it was even called Alex Kidd in Shinobi World at one point. It was quite the franchise on SMS, and then it carried over to Genesis. And just like the previous games, paper, rock, scissors is a big part of it, especially when you want to earn gifts, as they like to call it, which are actually power-ups that Alex Kidd can use. This is one of the most beautiful Sega Genesis games in my collection. I would swear that some kid's grandma bought this for him and he never opened it and never played it, because everything is pristine about it. This instruction manual is perfect. There's a poster. I'll start to unfold a little bit of it in a second. I don't want to uncrease it all the way, but I'll show it to you as well. And the cartridge, man, it just looks flawless. You would swear that I took the shrink wrap off this game today. Even though it's over 30 years old, it looks freaking untouched. Handling: do not bend, crush, or submerge. Do not put near a radiator or in direct sunlight. Well, I can guarantee you none of those things were ever done to this copy of Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle. I won't unfold this all the way, but that's an Altered Beast poster, and it's gorgeous. And look at this cartridge, man. No peeling on the label, no stains, and these pins, nobody's ever blown in this. Don't blow in your cartridges, by the way. It just corrodes the contacts. But look at that, man. Aside from a tiny little bit of dust, it's perfect. And you know what? I'm going to keep it that way because I'm going to go play it on the Genesis Mini. I don't get to feature this thing very often on the channel, but today seems like one of those days where, since I have it right here on the Genesis Mini, I can play it this way. And it's just the same as popping the cartridge in my Analog Mega SG or playing it in emulation and capturing the footage. I think it all amounts to the same experience when it comes to a game like Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle. This is not an overly complicated game. Now, if I have a certain fondness for the Alex Kidd franchise, I should probably explain why. I already referenced the fact that it got started on the Sega Master System. Well, growing up, I didn't have a Nintendo. I didn't have a Sega Master System. I didn't have an Atari, a ColecoVision, and Intellivision. I didn't have any of those things. I wasn't a dirt poor kid, but I was definitely on the side of we're getting by. I was a rural farm kid, so making ends meet could be a struggle for my parents, and they did their best to keep us in food and clothing, but frivolous things like video game systems were not necessarily on their purchasing list. It wasn't until I was in my teen years that I actually got a Game Boy, and I think they were somehow convinced that Walkman was a thing, the Sony Walkman, so they were like, oh, Game Boy, Walkman. It made sense to them, so they finally caved and got me a Game Boy for Christmas, and that was the only video game system I ever owned. But that didn't stop me from playing video games. I'd play them with my friends. I'd play them at their houses. I'd rent an NES for a weekend for a few bucks and make do with that. I still found ways to play games, and one of the best ways I ever had was my friend Chris, who you know on YouTube as Sir Crunch, hooked me up one summer when he and his grandmother got a new console, and he said, well, I'm not going to be using my Sega Master System now that I got this, so if you want to have it and play it, just go nuts. It's yours for the summer. I was like, dude, that is so sweet. Thank you. He has no idea, maybe he does, how much that made my day at the time. Made my whole summer, because I spent it playing the shit out of his Sega Master System in games. I played Alice Kidd Miracle World all the way through. I played Wonder Boy 3 all the way through. I played so many of his games. Just played the shit out of those Sega Master System games he had. Later on, when he decided to sell everything, I actually bought his Sega Master System games, so part of my collection still has his name written in marker on the instruction manual. So that's something I'm actually fond of. Not everybody would like to have something written on their box or manual, but the ones that have his name on them, it's like, oh, sweet. These were your childhood games and you sold them to me, and we're still friends 30 years later. So how awesome is that? Anyway, the reason I want to reference Alex Kidd and Miracle World so much is because Alex Kidd and the Enchanted Castle is a very linear sequel to it. It plays almost entirely the same, other than the sprites are larger and better defined, and your pause button is actually on the controller instead of on the Sega Master System console itself. That was one of the downsides of the SMS, was the complete lack of a pause. You couldn't hit start without hitting the button on the actual console. So if you were playing it, you had to sit close enough to the console to reach it and still far enough back from your TV to not have your eyes go cross-eyed, which incidentally, whenever Al's kid is doing a kicking attack or a punch, it kind of looks like he goes cross-eyed for a second. Not really sure what that's about. But suffice it to say, if this isn't a remake of Miracle World, it's definitely a successor, a spiritual and physical in every way successor. You are jumping over the same balls, some of which can move, some of which can't. The blue ones can move, the red ones are static. You are a sprite that looks basically the same. Your attack is a punch, it's basically the same. You play John Kenpo, which is Japanese for rock, paper, scissors, in mini games, which is essentially the same. Your power ups, like the helicopter and the skateboard, are essentially the same. There were a lot of deviations from the Miracle World formula with all of the different Alex Kidd games that came out on Sega Master System, but Enchanted Castle hews right back to the first one, Miracle World. And when I say first one, I don't just mean first in the chronological order of Alex Kidd games. I mean first as in first released, so commonplace it was a pack-in title, so commonplace beyond being a pack-in title that some versions of the Sega Master System actually came with Alex Kidd and Miracle World built into the system. Now, can you say that Alex Kidd is the original Sonic the Hedgehog? Was he the original mascot of Sega? You could argue that. Some would say Opa Opa from Fantasy Zone was a mascot character. Some would say Alex Kidd. Some would say Sonic, because Genesis did not really peak until they had the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise of games, at which point it just became the rival to Mario in every single way. And some would argue even exceeded it for a brief period of time, because there was that period in the 90s where Genesis was the cooler system and Super Nintendo was like the system you played role-playing games on. But in reality, those kind of stereotypes weren't true, because there were role-playing games on the Genesis like Phantasy Star 4 and Shining Force, and they were certainly action-packed games on Nintendo like R-Type 3 and Mega Man X. So the stereotyping of the cool and the uncool systems was an entire abstraction, just as was the term blast processing, which was made up for marketing hype. But it worked to some degree because people thought that the Sega Genesis was faster and that the Super Nintendo was somehow slow. The actual physical hardware inside of both of those systems is not super different. I mean, it's different in terms of number of colors on the screen and number of sprites that you can do things with and mode 7 scaling, but basically with clever enough programming, they can each do what the other can to a large factor of certainty, which is why there are so many games that are on both of them, especially fighting games like Mortal Kombat. You're going to get two versions, one for Super Nintendo, one for Sega Genesis, with minor differences like blood is turned on or blood is turned off. So, for the most part, what I focus on with Genesis does is the exclusives. I have made a couple of exceptions, but this is not one of them. Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle is definitely exclusive to Sega Genesis slash Mega Drive. Now, one of the things that can be tricky about Alex Kidd is how to get access to certain treasure chests that you want. You have to break away the blocks surrounding them. And in this case, the blocks, like these blue blocks, are actually objects that you can punch across the room into enemies, which you couldn't do in Miracle World. At the end of each level, you pick up the rice ball to progress to the next level. It's like your checkpoint for one level going to another. But in certain versions of Alex Kidd on Sega Master System, that rice ball was changed to a hamburger. Localization, people. Watch Slope's Game Room if you want to know more about those kind of differences. I believe he did a very excellent Alex Kidd video. If not, maybe it was Norm the Gaming Historian, but somebody has definitely pointed out all of those differences. It could have even been region locked from DYKG. So, Alex Kidd has different kinds of levels. There are underwater levels like this one that you're swimming through right now, and there are platforming levels, and there are even levels where you can use a helicopter to fly through the different sections and reach areas that you couldn't otherwise get to. One of the other interesting factors about Alex Kidd, this game in particular as well as Miracle World, is you don't necessarily have to fight every enemy you see. You can choose alternate paths. You can go over, you can go under. It's a very friendly game in terms of letting you make the choices that you want to complete a level. There's no quote-unquote right way, unless, of course, you're a speedrunner and you might want to run it a specific way to get the lowest possible time, but as a regular gamer, you can approach it any different way that you want. There's also a Japanese aesthetic to Alex Kidd and Enchanted Castle and to Miracle World, at least the original version that wasn't as heavily localized. Like you're seeing the yen go up, that's a yen symbol there for the coins you collect. Even though Alex Kidd is an alien from an alien planet, and he's going to a planet called Paper Rock to try and save his father, it's still hewing to Japanese cultural aesthetics with the rice balls, with the yen symbol. It's even printed on the bags of money that he picks up. I don't think I would really like it if they changed that stuff to dollar signs. It feels the way it should feel. It may be translated to English when they released it for Sega Genesis in North America and European territories, but they didn't change the feel of it this time. They kept it true to its artistic origin. They just changed the text in the opening scroll so that you could read it and understand the plot. Now, from the start menu, you can pick the different gifts that you've collected or that you've acquired along the way. And in this case, I'm going to show you the pogo stick, which allows you to bounce up and reach higher platforms. And also, like Scrooge McDuck and DuckTales, you can bounce on your enemies and kill them with the pogo stick. So it has double uses, but like some of the power-ups that Alex Kidd has, it can also be a detriment at times. Like when you have any of the racing vehicles, like the scooter, you are moving so fast it's hard to control where you're going and you can slam into things. The pogo stick is the same way. You can be trying to move forward and you can bash into a monster without landing on top of it and kill yourself without meaning to, as you will see here in a moment from my gameplay footage. But I would say overall the pogo stick is pretty useful, except in narrow confined spaces like that. So far I've been talking so much about the gameplay, I haven't even mentioned how easy or hard it would be to acquire a copy of this game if you wanted to play it on your Sega Genesis, Nomad, JVC, XI, Sega CD, whatever you've got. If you wanted to play this game physically, it would cost you about $13 loose, $20 complete, and $75 if you want it sealed away like some sort of holy grail to never be opened or played. And at that point I would ask you, why wouldn't you just buy a Genesis Mini so that you could actually play it because it would cost you less and you'd get 41 more games instead of just one game you can't ever look at or play. But I'm not judging collecting habits. I'm speaking of my own preferences. If you collect sealed things and they bring you joy, then enjoy yourself. Do what you want to do. But as for me, even though this game looks completely spotless inside of the package that I have it in, I'm still glad it's not sealed. I would rather it be open so I can take out the cartridge, hold it, look at it, put it in a console, do what I want with it, instead of it just being inaccessible for all time. Just my own personal preference, not a judgment on anybody else. Just like with amiibos, if it brings you joy to have a factory sealed unopened amiibo, I understand that because I have a Mega Man amiibo that I've never opened, but I also have Mega Man ones that I have opened because I want them out on display. So I can get the mentality of sealed things in certain cases, one to preserve and one to play with. Anyway, do what you want to do, but what I'd like you to do is subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment on what you think of Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle. I won't say it's a perfect game. The controls can be a little bit slippery at times. You'll feel like you're skating on ice trying to land on platforms here and there, but the physics can be adjusted to during the course of a gameplay session, and I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as other platforming games that are really loosey-goosey or what you'd call floating games, where you just hang in the air and never land on anything. Alex Kidd is not that bad. In fact, it's quite good, and I highly recommend it. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.